Welcome to Paskvan Podcasts. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel. Today, we are opening one of the oldest and darkest chapters in American history. It's an account marked by grand ambition, catastrophic isolation, and the chilling silence that followed the disappearance of over 100 men, women, and children. We are going beyond the simple legend of the Lost Colony of Roanoke.
This is truly America's first great unsolved disappearance. It's a story that, as you look at the sources, it leaves behind only a single unnerving word carved into wood.
Just one word.
One word. And it's created this profound historical black hole that has, swallowed 4 centuries of inquiry.
So our mission today is very targeted. We're going to take the stack of sources. We have original colonial accounts, modern research papers, archaeological reports, and really extract the most crucial pieces of knowledge. We want to understand not just that Roanoke vanished, but why. Why the conditions were so perfectly set for that failure.
Exactly. Tracing the story right from England's geopolitical struggles all the way up to those very ambiguous clues left behind in 1590.
And this specific inquiry, it matters. It matters immensely because the mystery of Roanoke is more than just a colonial failure, isn't it? It's a foundational narrative.
It is. It taps into this universal anxiety we all have of, vanishing without an explanation. And it defines the earliest, most brutal lessons learned by Europeans trying to establish some kind of permanence on a continent that was already managed by powerful, sophisticated native nations.
Okay, let's unpack this history.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to begin not on the shores of North America, but in the volatile courts of 16th century Europe.
Mm-hmm.
To really grasp how Roanoke could possibly just disappear, we have to start with the immense geopolitical tension of the 1580s. This wasn't some hopeful experiment.
No, not at all. It was a desperate maneuver by England. That's the crucial context. England, led by a fiercely competitive Queen Elizabeth I, was locked in this bitter, almost existential rivalry with the Spanish Empire.
And Spain, at this point, was the undisputed global superpower.
Absolutely. And its dominance was literally financed by the New World.
When we talk about finance, we mean immense physical wealth. The sources we have detailed it. By the 1580s, the Spanish treasure fleets were routinely delivering tons of gold, silver, and other goods back to Seville.
A continuous flow.
A continuous flow of mineral wealth that fueled Spain's military, its massive fleet, and its political influence across all of Europe.
Which put England in an almost impossible position. England desperately needed a foothold in North America.
For what reason, though? What was the core driver?
Several reasons. For legitimacy on the world stage, for one. To secure independent trade routes that didn't rely on hostile powers, and very specifically to establish a base from which to harass Spanish shipping.
Privateering.
What they delicately called privateering.
But the challenge was just monumental. England lacked the established bureaucracy, the vast network of existing support colonies, and just the sheer wealth that Spain had built up over the last century.
Right. England was essentially running on ambition and necessity. They were trying to build a colonial infrastructure on a foundation of sand.
And that fragility, that was really the first guarantee of Roanoke's future trouble.
It was. And this brings us to the central figure driving this whole unstable venture, Sir Walter Raleigh.
A famous name.
Oh, very. He was the epitome of the Elizabethan, courtier charismatic, ambitious, politically connected. His vision wasn't just about profit. It was about planting a permanent, sovereign English settlement in the New World.
So Raleigh secures a royal charter in 1584. And this grants him the right to establish this colony. But this charter wasn't free, was it? It came with huge stipulations.
Immense. Raleigh bore the full financial risk, and critically, the success of the colony was mandatory to maintain the charter.
So if he failed?
If he failed to plant a permanent, viable presence, the charter and his massive investment with it would be forfeited. He had to succeed.
And he understood that necessity, but it seems he severely underestimated the logistical difficulties. His attempts were less about careful long-term planning and more about projecting power quickly.
Exactly. He was trying to leapfrog this complex generation-long process that Spain had already perfected.
So this brings us to Raleigh's first effort in 1585. This is the one that precedes the true vanishing. But it's so important because it set the stage for deep mistrust and demonstrated exactly what not to do.
It was almost designed to fail. The expedition was led by Sir Richard Grenville, and a man named Ralph Lane was appointed governor of the settlement itself.
And the composition of the party is crucial here, right? Who did they bring?
While the sources emphasize this again and again, it was mostly soldiers, military engineers, craftsmen, and adventurers. They were men of action, suited for building forts and for skirmishes,
But not for farming.
but entirely unsuitable for the slow, difficult work of establishing a thriving agricultural community.
Their instructions were basically military in nature. Explore, build strong defenses, establish nominal relations, and secure local food supplies.
And they chose Roanoke Island, which, on paper, made sense. It sits strategically protected by the Outer Banks waterways, it seemed abundant in natural resources, and importantly, it was already home to the Secotine and Croatan peoples.
But the problem started almost immediately.
Right away. The initial phase was defined by sharp difficulties. The English arrived totally unprepared for the specific agricultural demands of the environment. Their supplies dwindled with alarming speed.
Made worse by storms, bad storage.
And they became dependent almost immediately on the native communities for guidance and for food.
And this dependence, it soured very, very quickly. Here's where the sources point to this catastrophic turning point that seems to have established permanent native hostility.
The Silver Cup.
The silver cup, an almost trivial object. The English suspected a local native village had stolen a silver cup.
And that suspicion, fueled by fear, paranoia, and just terrible judgment, it sparked a brutal English reprisal. They attacked the village, demanding restitution for this cup.
An unbelievable overreaction.
It was a cultural and diplomatic disaster. It shattered the fragile initial trust and escalated misunderstandings into outright antagonism. They had now alienated the very people whose survival knowledge was essential for them to make it through that first winter.
And Captain Ralph Lane, the governor, he only poured gasoline on the fire.
He did. He was, by all accounts, an authoritarian military figure. His leadership style was about giving orders, not negotiating for cooperation. And this approach just completely alienated the Secotine and other crucial native groups that they needed for food.
So Lane's systemic failure led to starvation and increased isolation. The sources show the English were constantly on edge, besieged not just by hunger, but by the anticipation of native retaliation.
Facing certain disaster, they abandoned the attempt in 1586. They hitched a ride back to England when Sir Francis Drake conveniently arrived after a privateering voyage.
So the lesson Raleigh took from this, it was profound. He realized colonial survival wasn't a military problem.
It was a community problem.
Exactly. The next attempt had to be a permanent, sustainable town, not just a military outpost designed to provoke Spain.
Which brings us to the true Lost Colony of 1587. Raleigh completely overhauled his recruitment process. He wasn't looking for soldiers anymore. He was looking for permanents.
He sought out entire families, farmers, women, children, artisans, people who were dedicated to planting deep roots.
And the man chosen to lead this new vision was John White.
And what's so compelling about White's appointment is his background. He wasn't a soldier.
No, he was an artist and an explorer. He'd been on the earlier expeditions, so he knew the area. He was thoughtful, deeply invested in the geography of the place, and crucially, he was bringing his own family.
That's a huge commitment.
It's everything. White led a group of over 100 settlers, including his daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias. This demographic shift, it signaled a genuine commitment to creating a self-sustaining English town.
They were carrying the hope of the entire English colonial project on their shoulders.
And initially, upon their arrival, there was this momentary, powerful surge of hope. And this hope was really personified by one man, Manteo, the Croatan chief.
Manteo was absolutely critical, wasn't he?
He was. He had previously traveled to England, so he understood the complex motivations of both worlds. He acted as this crucial liaison, helping to smooth relations with the neighboring tribes.
Which was no small feat, given Lane's destructive legacy.
Not at all. He was a trusted ally, and the colonists relied heavily on his good faith and his influence.
And then came the ultimate symbol of the colony's potential.
The birth of Virginia Dare.
Right, shortly after their arrival. The first English child born the New World. This wasn't just a birth, it was a political statement. It was a profound symbol of the English commitment to stay and propagate a future on American soil.
Yet history tends to repeat itself when the underlying structural problems are still there.
And they were.
They were. Despite the shift in who the settlers were, the familiar obstacles reappeared almost immediately.
They arrived too late in the season to plant enough crops. Supplies were critically low. And they couldn't salvage enough materials or resources from the abandoned Lane colony.
So they were facing the same harsh reality as the first group, only this time they had women and children to feed.
The situation became dire very quickly. And this forced John White to confront an impossible choice. risk losing the entire colony to starvation, or leave them, temporarily, to secure necessary supplies from England.
And this was the tragic decision. This is what set the entire vanishing in motion. Despite his profound reluctance, and despite leaving his entire family behind his daughter, his new granddaughter White decided he had to return to England.
For essential supplies, livestock, tools, more people, and most importantly, food.
He promised the settlers he would be back within months.
He left the colony in the late summer of 1587, believing his absence would be just a brief logistical inconvenience. He had no way of knowing that the political currents across the Atlantic were about to swell into a perfect storm.
A storm that would trap him and condemn his colony.
This is where the story pivots from a colonial logistic failure to a geopolitical tragedy of immense scale. As White frantically petitioned for ships upon his return to England, the crown and the nation were consumed by the rapidly escalating threat of the Spanish Armada in 1588.
The Spanish Armada was the geopolitical event that decisively sealed Roanoke's fate. England went into full national defense mode.
They realized that this massive Spanish fleet represented an imminent existential threat to the kingdom itself.
And national defense meant one thing for John White: total mobilization. Every available vessel, regardless of its original purpose, was immediately commandeered by the crown for the war effort.
So colonial supply missions, a distant, speculative investment.
They weren't just postponed, they were outright forbidden.
White was trapped. He tried repeatedly to secure a vessel, offering high prices, leveraging Raleigh's political connections.
But even Raleigh himself, whose massive financial investment and royal charter depended entirely on the colony's survival, was utterly powerless against the wartime priorities of the Queen.
So the 3-year delay that followed was just catastrophic. Imagine the psychological toll on the settlers, waiting through not just one, but 3 successive growing seasons, watching the horizon for a ship that never appeared.
During this period, food undoubtedly ran out. The hope that Virginia Dare represented must have slowly curdled into despair.
The sources show White was finally able to secure passage in 1590, a full 3 years after promising to return in a few months.
That gap, 1587 to 1590, that is the black box where the colony's fate was decided. During that time, the community either starved, integrated, or was otherwise swallowed by the realities of the New World.
And the irony is, even when he did secure a ship, the mission remained secondary.
Right. The vessel White took was crewed by opportunists who viewed the trip not as a rescue effort, but as a chance for privateering raiding vulnerable Spanish ships in the Caribbean.
Which meant endless detours and delays. It just compounded White's agony and pushed the mission further past the point of feasibility.
That journey must have been fraught with dread, not anticipation. White knew, with every day they spent hunting Spanish gold, that the chances of finding his family alive were dwindling to nothing.
So when they finally reached the Outer Banks in August 1590, the eerie silence was immediate.
White's own account speaks of it. No smoke rising from cook fires, no figures on the beach, a shoreline utterly unmarked by recent human activity. The sources convey this feeling of palpable absence, like the island itself was holding a terrible secret.
On August 18, 1590, the exact day Virginia Dare would have turned 3 years old, White and his party set foot on the settlement site.
And the silence gave way to the unsettling truth. The colony was empty.
But here is the crucial, complex detail that continues to confound historians. The detail that separates Roanoke from a simple massacre narrative.
The site showed signs of organized activity, not conflict. The houses, the sources confirm, had not been burned or ransacked.
They were carefully dismantled, piece by piece. The palisade that surrounded the encampment had been systematically removed.
This detail strongly suggested a deliberate, planned relocation. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no scattered possessions, no hastily dug graves. It was as if the community had reached a consensus and packed up their most essential items before moving as a single unit.
And then, the clue. The clue that provided hope, yet immense uncertainty.
Carved into a stout primary post near the entrance of the dismantled settlement was the single word, CROATOAN, in clear capital letters.
And on a nearby trunk, the letters CRO.
CRO.
White immediately remembered his own instructions. He had explicitly told the settlers that if they were forced to relocate, they must carve the name of their new destination.
And the name CROATOAN immediately pointed south to CROATOAN Island, the home of Chief Menteo, their known and trusted ally.
But the absence of a crucial detail was perhaps as important as the word itself.
The cross.
The cross. White had instructed them that if they left under duress, fear, or attack, they had to carve a Maltese cross beneath the directional message.
and there was no cross.
No cross. This suggested, at least to White, that their departure had been peaceful, or at a minimum, organized. They were not driven out by force, but had migrated by choice or urgent necessity.
Still, the carving told them nothing about the circumstances of the move, or the 3 years of suffering that must have preceded it, or whether the move had even been successful.
The sheer passage of time and all other physical tracks had vanished. White's party searched frantically for any hidden note or sign.
And they found only one object of importance, a large chest belonging to White himself that the colonists had buried for safekeeping.
But even this yielded no answers.
No. When they unearthed it, storms and moisture had ruined the contents. Maps had rotted into pulp, books were shredded, notes and ink dissolved. It was a physical manifestation of the knowledge that was lost in that 3-year delay.
So, with the word CROATOAN offering this lifeline, White urgently pleaded with the ship's captain to sail immediately south toward CROATOAN Island, which today we know is Hatteras.
But here, fate intervened one final, brutal time.
This is the heartbreaking twist in all the sources. A sudden, violent Atlantic storm descended upon them.
And the Outer Banks are notorious for their deadly shifting shoals. The sandbars in shallow water extend far out into the ocean, making navigation treacherous even in calm weather. In a storm.
It's a death trap.
Yes. The ship was battered, anchors dragged, and they were in immediate danger of being wrecked. The captain, concerned about losing the entire vessel and crew, which, remember, was primarily outfitted for privateering, not rescue, he insisted on abandoning the search.
White's pleas were ignored.
He was forced to sail away, watching as the storm pushed his ship away from the very island where his daughter Eleanor and his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, might still have been alive.
He never returned to America. He died years later, the weight of that failure and the unresolved fate of his family just hanging over him.
And the story he brought back to England immediately fueled intense speculation. It's a debate that divides historians then and now between the bleakest narratives and the possibility of survival.
Let's start by exploring those bleakest theories, what we can call the catastrophe model. The first and most enduring theory is a hostile native attack.
This hypothesis suggests that mainland tribes, perhaps the Secauaun or others who remembered Ralph Lane's aggression and the destruction of their village, decided to wipe out the English settlement in retaliation. It's a compelling, understandable motivation.
But the counter-evidence, as we've already discussed, is significant. For such a large-scale attack to completely destroy the colony, you'd expect to find signs of a struggle.
Exactly. The orderly dismantling of the palisade, the removal of the houses piece by piece, and the total lack of blood or scattered belongings. It strongly challenges the idea of a catastrophic battle. If it was a massacre, it was preceded by an extraordinary act of organization.
Okay, so then we have the starvation and disease model. It's plausible that the harsh environment, the lack of resupply, and arriving at the wrong season just led to mass death.
It's a strong hypothesis, but it struggles to account for that clear directional clue. If disease or hunger had wiped them out in place, the bodies would have been found. And certainly, the effort to dismantle an entire settlement, carry the pieces, and carve a massive sign would have been beyond the strength of a dying community.
The evidence points away from them succumbing where they stood.
It does. And finally, there's the dramatic geopolitical theory, a Spanish raid. Spain had a presence in Florida at San Agustin and routinely destroyed French and English outposts in territories they claimed as their own. It's entirely possible a Spanish fleet wiped them out.
It's highly plausible given the rivalry. But this is where we have to rely on the nature of Spanish colonial administration.
The Spanish Empire was meticulously bureaucratic. Records of successful raids, conquests, and destruction of foreign settlements were essential for reporting success back to the king and justifying military spending.
And the sources confirm that despite extensive research into Spanish archives, there is no confirmed record, not a single detailed battle report, ship's log, or a celebratory mention of a successful large-scale attack on an English settlement of this size in North Carolina during that critical 3-year window.
The lack of a Spanish smoking gun weakens this theory considerably, though you can't rule it out entirely.
So, when the evidence fails to fully support these catastrophic narratives, the focus shifts entirely to the most hopeful theory, the integration model. This is where the story gets really intricate.
The integration model is based directly and primarily on that single word, CROATOAN. Faced with 3 years of abandonment, starvation, and fear, the English simply sought refuge with their known, trusted allies, the Croatan people, or potentially other mainland groups like the Roanoke.
This suggests a scenario where survival demanded an exchange. It wasn't just a charitable handout.
No, not at all. The English settlers brought with them valuable, high-demand skills and materials. They had metalworking capability, carpentry knowledge, access to European fabrics and tools.
And the native communities offered immediate, essential reciprocity. Survival knowledge, security, shelter, and critically, food.
The English identity, faced with annihilation, likely dissolved into the pre-existing sophisticated cultural landscape of the native nations.
And this theory is profoundly supported by later anecdotal evidence, isn't it? From explorers traveling through the region in the early 17th century after Jamestown was established.
Absolutely. The sources include reports from men like John Lederer and later John Lawson in the early 1700s, who recorded local indigenous oral traditions. These traditions sometimes spoke of white ancestors or strangers who came from the sea and were absorbed into their population generations earlier.
And more physiologically, these same explorers reported encountering native groups, particularly in the vicinity of the Albemarle Sound, who displayed unusual physical features.
Yes, individuals with notably lighter hair or striking gray and blue eyes, which are clear biological markers of European ancestry.
So if the Roanoke settlers assimilated, their English identity simply ceased to exist as a separate entity. The colonial mission failed, but the human element survived by blending.
They became silent ancestors in a new, blended world.
It suggests the story transforms rather than ends. The English identity dissolved into the fabric of the New World, a process that doesn't fit the English definition of a successful colony, but it certainly fulfills the definition of human survival.
And this idea has been given significant support by modern archaeological efforts, which have tried to move beyond the legend and find hard evidence of their final location.
Modern archaeology has confirmed the colony's presence at Fort Raleigh. We found post holes, ceramics, musket balls. But again, these findings only confirm that John White was telling the truth about where he left them, not where they went.
The real game changer came with discoveries further inland. Referred to by some researchers as Site X, these findings involve fragments of late 16th century English pottery and metal artifacts scattered deep inland along the Albemarle Sound, far from Roanoke Island itself.
For instance, the discovery of a copper aglet, that's a small metal sheath used to cap the ends of laces. That was highly significant.
Incredibly significant. Copper was immensely valuable to native communities, far more so than it was to the English.
So the existence of these specific pre-Jamestown era English artifacts in mainland native villages strongly suggests either extensive trade networks or, more provocatively, that actual residents of the Lost Colony integrated into these communities.
These items represent material culture that was absorbed into the native cultural landscape. It provides a physical link supporting the anecdotal evidence of the integration model.
However, we can't discuss modern searches without addressing the most controversial and confusing element that has plugged this historical record, the so-called Darstones.
The Darstones are a classic example of how powerfully a historical vacuum can be exploited by sensationalism.
They surfaced in the 1930s, beginning with one stone allegedly found near the Chowan River. It purportedly bore a message from Eleanor Dare John White's daughter, detailing suffering, deaths, and the migration inland.
And while that first stone had a certain degree of plausibility, the floodgates just opened. A massive collection of subsequent stones appeared, supposedly written by Eleanor Dare, complete with increasingly dramatic accounts and inconsistent spellings.
The consensus among serious scholars today is that the collection was overwhelmingly a hoax, or at least a massive series of forgeries that completely overshadowed any potential truth in the first finding.
They were just too numerous, their language was too convenient for the romantic narrative, and their discovery pattern was too theatrical to be genuine historical records.
Which is a tragedy for historical scholarship. Instead of clarifying the story, the Darstones added the sensational controversy. It demonstrates the seductive power of the riddle and how willing the public was to accept a convenient, dramatic ending over the messy reality of assimilation.
The story became America's first enduring ghost story. The cultural legacy is immense, inspiring countless novels, dramas, and historical retellings.
And Virginia Dare herself became a central, tragic figure, a powerful symbol of innocence, hope, and ultimate historical erasure. She embodies the fragility of those colonial dreams.
Right. And for the state of North Carolina, the Roanoke mystery is part of their historical DNA, carefully preserved through outdoor dramas and extensive historical interpretation.
But the sources we have stress that to truly understand the vanishing, We have to consider the indigenous perspective, which often reframes the question entirely. For the native nations of the region, Roanoke isn't necessarily a vanishing in the European sense.
That's right. Oral traditions among the Croatan and others suggest the English were taken in, perhaps not as equals immediately, but certainly allowed to survive by integrating. The English simply ceased to exist as a separate people. They were transformed and folded into the pre-existing cultural landscape.
A narrative that fundamentally clashes with the colonial perspective, which frames the event solely as a European tragedy, a loss for the English crown.
The indigenous perspective views it as an adaptation, a natural process of the continent absorbing a small group of struggling outsiders.
So after 4 centuries of relentless searching, the question remains, why does this mystery persist? Why is there no closure?
It all comes down to the complete lack of irrefutable proof. There is no final letter, no definitive site of a confirmed massacre, no clean corroborating Spanish record. The story exists entirely in fragmented accounts, ambiguous carvings, and the echo of oral tradition.
And there is that deeply human, almost existential element. Roanoke taps into the anxiety that an entire society, over 100 people with names, lives, and ambitions, might just slip out of the historical record, remembered only as an unresolved question mark.
It is the ultimate fear of historical erasure.
So when we synthesize all the evidence, the orderly dismantling of the homes, the lack of conflict signs, that CROATOAN message, the inland artifacts, and the consistent indigenous oral histories, the ultimate conclusion is that Roanoke's ending was not likely one dramatic, catastrophic event that happened overnight.
It wasn't a single terrible massacre or a collective surrender to mass starvation where they just lay down and died together.
That's right. The evidence points to a slow, agonizing process of dispersal and quiet adaptation. Faced with abandonment by the English crown, small groups likely broke away, some joining the Croatan tribe near Hatteras, others moving further inland toward the Roanoke or other mainland villages, until the original lines of the English community were completely dissolved.
It was survival achieved through slow, reluctant assimilation.
The colony was born of immense ambition and hope, but its failure was tragically guaranteed by the fragile logistics, the terrible timing, and the brutal demands of an empire that prioritized defense against Spain over the survival of a distant settlement.
Roanoke was simply the first English colonial venture to be completely absorbed by the forces of the continent and the realities of the New World. The settlers were caught between a promise made by a distant queen and a reality that refused to bend to their will.
Their loss serves as a powerful warning that colonial expansion was never inevitable. It was always precarious and often paid for in the lives of those who were silently swallowed by the unknown. The mystery of Roanoke forces us to consider a haunting thought. If survival required shedding one's entire identity and language, becoming a silent ancestor in another people's history, does that count as disappearance? Or is that perhaps the most profound and complex kind of survival imaginable?